Hello and welcome back to Shifting Gears. Today we're going to show you a simple basic brake job on a 2013 Honda Santa Fe. Even though it's on the Hyundai, just keep in mind that it's really kind of a generic function, so it's about the same on most vehicles. So relatively easy, quick thing that you can do yourself. Well, let's get started. Alright, well, we went ahead and got the wheels off and got together the tools that we're going to need. Basically, you see here, this is a good example of what's going to be used. You got the impact for removing the bolts and stuff. You got this for compressing the caliper, a ratchet just in case where you lose torque with a swivel on an impact, screwdriver because they actually have little bolts or screws that hold the rotor to the assembly. In which case, most of the time, a screwdriver won't break it loose, so we use what's called an impact driver. I'm not sure that they rent these, but I know you can purchase them at local parts stores for not too much. Of course, a little pry bar and a wrench. And, well, now it's time to get started. Let's get this done. Alright, now that we're ready to get started, one of the first things we're going to do, we're going to take a little pry bar, we're going to stick it in this hole, find somewhere where we can grip, and we're going to compress that piston a little bit. Just like that. So you can grab it, move it back and forth, know that your pins are not sticking. If you can't move this back and forth, you know that you have to pay attention to these pins here. There's some repairs that need to be done there. And B, because the piston inside the caliper right there is hollow, which I'll show you a little bit later. And sometimes the pads have little dimples that stick out the back side. And if you try to unbolt the caliper, slide the caliper off, and it catches on those dimples, you could destroy a piston. You don't see that a lot on passenger cars, but when it comes to bigger trucks and stuff like that, you see it quite often. You know, sometimes they'll have little dimples like what you see right here on the back of this brake pad. And like I said, the piston will actually bump up against it, hit it, and if you keep trying to pry it out, you'll bust the piston out of the caliper. So keep that in mind. Alright, first thing we're going to do is take off the two caliper bolts off the bracket. Now on the back side, on the slides here, sometimes you'll see that there's a nut, looks like a nut sitting there that you think you can get a wrench on, but in a lot of cases it's too narrow to get a wrench on it. So best thing to do, you know, if you have an impact, use a impact, zip them right out, you don't have a problem. If you don't have an impact, you're using a regular ratchet and stuff, you can grab a hold of them with a pair of pliers while you bust these loose. Once it's busted loose, generally it's not a problem, but you know, just keep that in mind. Alright, let's do this. We'll slip the caliper off, move it out of the way. Remember, never leave the caliper hanging by the brake hose. You can actually stress the brake hose and cause yourself some problems in the future. We're going to take one of the old brake pads, we're actually going to put it in the caliper, use that with the C-clamp to compress the piston. Right, now we need to get those two off. Sometimes an impact will be enough to do it. But if you have to use a swivel, don't forget a swivel will take up torque. So in some cases you wouldn't be able to. Oops. Let's try and do that again. Now keep in mind, a little tip there, when you're doing this with hand tools, take a ratchet and bust both of them loose, then take them out. That way, like say if you pull this one out first, when you go to loosen this one, the bracket's going to want to do this on you. So get them both loose and then take them out. Okay, now that we got the caliper off, we're going to go ahead and compress this piston. Just keep an eye on where you put the C-clamp for it. You're okay to do it here as long as the piston compresses normally. If it's hard to compress, then A, you've got a problem that you need to diagnose further, like a caliper or a brake hose, which, you know, honestly, if you end up replacing the caliper, you're best to go ahead and replace the brake hose at the same time. But for now, we're just doing the pads and the rotors. So let's get this in place. And twist her in. Remember, you want to do this slowly. And in some cases, people will go ahead and top off the master cylinder because they look at it and they think it looks slow. So when you compress the piston, that fluid goes back through and then you'll end up with a leak right underneath the master cylinder. So don't freak out if you see that. But another little tip there is keep in mind that if you see that your master cylinder is getting low, that's a good indication on the wear of your brake pads, because the fluid displaces the amount of brake pad that wears off. So if you see it start getting low, you know it's a good time to check your brakes. And now that we've got that compressed, we're going to go ahead and get these screws out. Now in most cases you wouldn't be able to take a screwdriver and just turn them out, in which this case it actually worked. But for when it doesn't work, that's when you use the impact driver. Get the driver, find a bit that fits it, and then put it in place. Put a little pressure like you're trying to loosen it on there and smack it with a hammer, and that'll bust it right loose. And just screw them on out. There's our rotor off. Alright, so now we got that apart, we're getting ready to put the new rotors on. You may think I'm crazy, but put the rotor on there backwards and just kind of set it in place so it's sitting there at an angle. There is a reason for my madness. When you get a new rotor, usually they are coated with an oil for keep them from rusting and stuff while they're sitting on the shelf for shipping. So you need to make sure you clean those off. Otherwise it'll end up contaminating your brake pads and you have noises and all kinds of stuff from it. So set it on there backwards, take some brake clean, spray it off. You can give it a good wipe, which will help. Keep in mind that the brake clean will try to evaporate while you do it. So try to move quickly and do it in little sections. Now that we've got the back side of it done, this is where we'll flip it over. We'll look where the screw holes are, get them lined up, and they're installed. Now we can go ahead and put the screws back in, which no reason to use the impact driver here. Just run them in and cinch them down with a ratchet or screwdriver. Now that we got that done, we'll go ahead and clean the front. Okay, right here we've got some brake shims, which in this case, the brake pads that we bought came with brand new ones. Now, a slight warning on this, we're going to go ahead and clean up the used ones and reuse them. The reason being is I've run into many times to where these will actually contact one side of the rotor or the other and give you a high-pitched, kind of like squeal type sound, kind of like a, you know, when your brakes are trying to tell you that they're wore out, the squealers are making noise. So, as long as your old ones are okay, I'd suggest cleaning them up and go ahead and using those. If they're damaged or whatever, sure, go ahead and use these. Just make sure that when you install them, they don't contact any surface of the rotor. Okay, let's get these put on. Alright, now on installing this, we're going to go ahead and get the caliper mount bolted up first. Then we're going to install the shims on them. That way when we put the shims on, we can see and make sure that neither one of them is going to contact each other and create you any problems. Slip this back in there. Keep in mind when you're doing brake pads, you have this nifty little thing here called a squealer. Make sure that you put it on so that it is the last thing that the rotor will contact. Or in other words, this pad is going to go on like this, the squealer towards the inside. As the wheel turns forward, the rotor is going to come past the brake edge, and then it's going to contact the squealer. That's the correct way to do it. If you do it the opposite way, it will actually break the squealer off and the squealer won't be able to perform its job. Slip it in there. When doing this, what you want to do is put it in there kind of at an angle like this so that it's pushing against this piece, and then twist it into place. Makes it a whole lot easier on installing it, because sometimes you try to stick it in there flat, they'll be bumping up against the edges of the shims there and they won't want to go in. Alright, so now make sure your brake hose is right, it's not twisted or anything like that. Take your caliper and slip it on. Get your caliper bolt started. And go ahead and tighten them up. That's the way the front's done. We're going to go ahead and move over, do the other front brakes, and then we'll switch back to the back and show you how to do those. Okay, now we've got the fronts done. We're going to go ahead and move to the backs, get them taken care of. Same things before. Get these screws out of the middle of the rotor. Stick that in there and smack it. And then just take your screwdriver and twist them out. And just like in the front, we're going to go ahead and compress the piston. Now on rear brakes, some vehicles like to use a screw-in type of piston instead of the regular hydraulic one that just pushes in and out. On those, you're not going to be able to stick this in here and get it to move freely. Those, you're just going to have to loosen them up, flip them off of it, and twist the piston in. Which, on that, you know, to get by, you can use like a pair of needle noses or something. It's a pain in the butt. Or you can get the actual proper tool. Most of the parts stores do have those. And unfortunately, those are a bit of a pain in the butt also. They're a lot better than just trying to use a pair of needle noses, which will actually round out the holes on you. So, now we'll go ahead and get these off. Now the way they designed this, there's no room to get the air tool in there. So we'll use a ratchet, whoops, with the right socket and see about getting this popped loose. Now remember, when you're doing this, keep an eye right here, see if this turns on you. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Alright, in that case it didn't, so we can go ahead and screw that on out. And we'll move to the lower bolt. Once again, get the piston out of your way. Go ahead and remove one of your brake pads, which is I'm going to bind it up just a little bit. And go ahead and get this piston compressed. Alright, now that that part's done, go ahead and get the caliper mount bracket off of it. And there we go. One thing to keep in mind, this one has this on there, a little plug that you actually take that, pop it out, so you can get to the adjustment for the inside shoes, which are the emergency brake on this thing. This is what's called drum and hat type of brake system, which you have your pads that contact this surface through here, but then your emergency brake shoes, which contact in here. Hence the name drum and hat. And looks kind of like top hat the way it's designed. So you might want to make sure you pull this plug, because usually most new rotors do not come with that plug. And that helps keep all the gunk and nastiness from getting inside to the brake shoes. screws back into it. Alright, don't forget to put this plug back in it. You see it's got a lip here, and then the outside there. You want to get that lip inside this hole. So start it on one side, and then you can take a screwdriver, pop it down in place. Keep in mind, don't use a pick, because if you try to use a pick, you're just going to punch a hole right through it. Let's go ahead and get the outside clean. See right there that pad was sticking a little bit, which is all the more reason to make sure that you clean these up or replace them. Go ahead and get the caliper mount back in place. Remember, when tightening those up, you want those pretty darn snug. Put our shims back in. Make sure that we are not contacting. Well, that looks good. So we'll slip our new pads in there. As you can see, we've done all the cleanup that we can, and the pad still doesn't want to go in there too well. Do not force it. That pad needs to be able to move freely back and forth. If you have to force it in there, that means it's going to want to stay wherever it's at. So once you hit the brakes, it's going to compress the brakes against that rotor. You let off, the pads aren't going to move. So it's going, in a way, it's going to be like a brake hanging up. You'll think it's a brake caliper, and really it's just the pad having lost the freedom of movement. Now, I have seen where sometimes there's a bit too much of a coating on either edge of it. So you might want to take that to like a cutoff wheel, a grinder wheel, or something like that, and just kind of tap both sides, bring it over and try it. You may have to go back and forth several times, because yes, you want them snug enough to where they're not going to be sitting in there shaking up and down, bouncing in there, knocking like crazy. But at the same time, you want them loose enough so that they are able to slide. So if you're running into a problem like we are, so we're going to take it over to a grinder wheel and just slightly tap each edge. Come over, try it. Go do it again, come over and try it until we actually get some movement. Keep in mind when doing this, the ends are going to get quite hot because of the friction, so don't touch them. See, now I can slide it in easily by hand, and you got some movement. So we'll see if let's do the same thing with the outside. There we go, outside's good. Now, one thing to keep in mind is take a look and see. If you look right here, you can see there's a little gap which will have you pushing up against that. So make sure that that is pressed all the way up in there like that when you go to install the pad, or it may falsely indicate another issue. And we're ready to put the caliper back on. Once again, make sure that hose isn't twisted. If you like, you can actually dangle it like that for a second. That way you'll know it's in its natural position. And then go ahead and slip it on. Now, a lot of the brake things will tell you to grease the caliper, put grease on the back of the brake pads, stuff like that. You can do that if you'd like. I don't like to do it because if there's grease in there, that means it can get slung around. It can actually get in between the contact surface between the rotor and the brake pad, and that can cause you all kinds of problems. Same thing as if you have to lubricate your slide pins here. Put a very light coating on your slide pins. But if they're sticking, what you're going to want to do is spray out the inside the best you can with some brake clean. Do the same thing on these. Take them to a wire wheel if necessary to remove any grit and grime that you can't just wipe off of it. And then spray in some brake clean, stick it in there, slide it back and forth, twist it around, pull it out, spray it again. Keep doing it until you get freedom of movement with your brake pin. And make sure that if you do spray it out with the brake cleaner and clean it out, make sure you put new caliper grease inside there so that they can slide and won't seize up. And also make sure that your boots are in good shape, aren't cracked, ripped, torn, anything like that, to allow moisture to get inside to cause the problem to begin with. Alright, now, get these in. Keep in mind, if you're having a hard time getting the screws to thread in, just kind of wiggle the caliper around a little bit. In a lot of cases, it'll help you screw them in. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and hit this bottom one with an impact because we have access to it. And keep in mind, you don't want to over tighten these. They're real easy to break. If you're not proficient with an impact, don't try it. Definitely don't try it with like a 1/2 inch impact. But just give it a tap to zip it in, and then another tap to cinch it up. Don't do anything more than that. You'll end up breaking them, and then you'll have to replace them. Now, let's top one tight. And there you go. There's your brake job. Okay. Go ahead and move over to the other side. Get it knocked out real quick. Alright, now that we've got the brake job done, it's time for the most important part. Now, absolutely do not forget this part, because when you compress some brake pads, you move them pads away from the rotors. Now when you get inside, you start it up and put it in gear, you go, you hit your brakes, you're going to keep going because you're slowly moving the brake pads back toward the rotor. So immediately after getting the brake job done, climb in, pump that pedal up. Make sure you got a good firm pedal before you do anything. And now just press your pedal down. You'll notice the first time it'll go all the way to the floor. And it's liable to do it for a few times afterwards, but make sure you get a good firm pedal, and once you have that firm pedal, just pump it a few extra times just to make sure. Then you should be good to go. Well, after test driving, it looks like the repair was a success. Initially it came in with a vibration in the steering wheel whenever you hit the brakes, or a pulsation. That's all gone now. Brakes feel good, stops it good. So, looks like we're done. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I figured it'd be the best angle to show them because everything's back there and I'll be in the way. Help if it didn't keep falling down on me. Come on. Come on. I wasn't holding it right. Or so I thought. It's starting to go. Got this thing so close, it's hard to get in there and take a look. I don't want to look at the back of my head. Sometimes these bolts are a little tight. Alright, let's do this. I'll learn how to talk one of these days.